again, everybody. Welcome back to the Azure 101 series, and this is our first spin-off session, and we're going to be looking at two really helpful tools for you today to help you compare your on-premise spend with that of your Azure spend. So these are going to be the total cost of ownership calculator and also the Azure pricing calculator. So let's dig right in. Okay, perfect. So here we are then with our first stop, which is the Azure or Microsoft Total Cost of Ownership calculator. Essentially, this is going to, as it says on the screen, estimate the cost savings that you could realize by migrating workloads to Azure. So it's going to be taking into consideration key factors for your on-premise environment. Now, the first thing to point out is that you can save reports. Now, in order to actually do that, because there may be more than one workload, more than one site that you're actually looking to do this with, you can actually save numerous different reports to the platform. I would recommend signing in, so you can see that I've actually signed in just here, and that will allow me to then do those saves. And then what we're going to do is work it through it in a systematic process. So it'll ask us to start defining our workloads. We can see we start off with the server experience. So again, you would type in the actual name of server. You're probably going to have more than one, but again, this is just for demo purposes. And you can start to enter in the key information. So what's the operating system that's running? Is it Windows? Is it Linux? Is it a physical server, or is it a virtual machine? And you can see that obviously the drop-down menus allow you then to select the different options that you want. And the key thing here is to make sure that you enter as much information as physically possible. So how many servers are there? What's the RAM? Is it optimized for specific processes, maybe for memory, maybe for compute, depending on what you're doing on-prem. You'll also note that it still has whether or not you're running Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2. Obviously, you can tick it if you are. Many people probably would have upgraded the operating system already, so that's not necessarily something that has to be done. As we scroll down again, we've got the next kind of piece of the puzzle, which is typical for migration, which is databases. And again, you can enter your own name here. If you ever do need to actually add any more, you can do. Now, there's two ways. I probably should have said this for the server bit. There's two ways you can typically do that. Obviously, you can add another database down here, but you can actually clone what you've done as well. So rather than kind of re-clicking all the screens, maybe you've got duplicate in terms of configuration for many different databases, but you just want to call them various different things for your records. You can just clone this and it will do a duplicate for you. And then again, exactly the same process. We're going to be filling out what the actual database is. Is it SQL? Is it Postgres? Is it an Oracle database? Is it on a physical box? Is it a virtual machine? Is it got an operating system for either Windows or Linux behind it? And then again, what's those virtualization type that's actually using? What's the compute that it's using? Is it optimized for memory, for example? And so on and so forth. So the idea here is that you would go through and you would add every single database that you have got in your on-premise environment. And again, if you do have things that are legacy, so SQL 2008 or 2008 R2, you can obviously tick the box to suggest that that's still a consideration. Moving on, again, we've got storage. Now, again, you're probably going to have more than one different type of storage capacity, but feel free to kind of add the storage in. So again, we can then decide what we want to do. Maybe we've got a NAS drive or a file share that we want to also bring to cloud. And again, we can enter in all the various different details. If at any stage when you're going through this particular calculator, or indeed any calculator that Microsoft provides, you'll notice that they always provide you with information. So you can actually click on that and it will give you an indication of what's actually required. I mean, in this case, it's fairly self-explanatory. We're looking at the amount of backup storage that's actually being used, so we can then use that as an estimate when we bring to cloud. Again, networking, same consideration. We're actually trying to say which regions we need to be going into, so you need to be mindful of this. It may be UK South, obviously UK West. There's various different regions that you can connect to Azure, so it's just about being aware of where that's going to be. Next, we go to the next screen, which is adjusting any assumptions that we've got. So the first thing, and it's one that we come into time and time again for various partners, is actually whether or not they've got any kind of software debt. Typically, you've probably purchased a Windows or even a SQL license. There's many different channels to be able to do that, not all of which would give you something called software assurance. But if you have purchased maybe an open value license with software assurance or a CSP server subscription, you would be eligible for what's known as an Azure hybrid benefit. Essentially, it's a bring your license to the cloud approach. And actually, you can see here, reading through, it will leverage a discount saving when you apply it to the virtual machines that you've got. So very, very straightforward. All we're doing is we're telling the calculator, yes, I have some server subscriptions with software assurance for Windows, or yes, I have some server subscriptions or subscriptions with software assurance for SQL. By ticking that, that will then suggest that we can use these in the cloud. If it doesn't have these ticks because maybe we don't have eligible licenses, then again that will be a consideration when you move, and it will be flagged within the report. A key part of understanding what your journey is going to look like is whether or not the data that you hold is actually going to be geographically replicated. So I'd argue probably one of the biggest benefits that Azure brings is the fact that you've got global reach. Global reach is great, but also it means that you've got resilience as well. So if you wanted to have data maybe in UK South, but for resilience reasons you want to actually replicate to UK West, then you can do that. And again, flipping the toggle then adjusts those various considerations for the calculator. Now again, if you're ever unsure about any of these, because I appreciate that this may be new or uncharted territory, you can always click on the Learn About Geo-Redundant Storage, and it will take you straight through to the Microsoft Learn documents so that you can see it in a bit more detail and have a quick read. But we'll head back to our calculator and start to look through the rest of the screen. So we're now going into virtual machine costs, and again it's asking us to make an assumption. If we're not sure, I would suggest leaving it blank, but again this is an area that discussions with a Azure solution architect would be able to support you with. It's suggesting that actually you could have B series, so these are burstable virtual machines where you build up compute credits to then burst at a specific period of time, so it can be very, very helpful. And if you want to see recommendations of this, then you can just hit that toggle to OK, and that would make the recommendations. Now the next kind of piece is where it gets really interesting for actual recommendations from this particular calculator, because there's going to be a lot of assumptions of the savings that you'll make when you move to Azure. For example, a lot of people miss off electrical costs, but it's a major consideration because you may be paying for quite a high rate of electricity on premise. That's all handled for you when you move to cloud. You're essentially just going to be paying for the service itself. So actually by putting this into the system, we can then start to track what that will be. Now you'll notice actually that this is in USD. So what I would probably want to do is if I scroll to the very top, I can actually change my currency to GBP. And I could have done this on the first screen as well, and that now adjusts my figures. And again, I can then start to put in there what my spend is going to be in terms of kilowatt hours. I mean, this is again just an assumption, so let's just leave it there. And then we can start breaking down those costs from a storage perspective. Again, we can just elevate wherever we feel we need to. The next one is quite an interesting one because, again, part of moving to cloud would be not necessarily just lift and shift. It's making suggestions that actually, if you were to, say, reduce management overhead because some of the virtual machines that you've currently got could maybe move to platform services, then that's great. So this is just to sort of flag that in your mind. There may be a reduction in management that's needed from your side. So what's the typical number of physical servers that are actually being managed by your IT administrator? Again, same question, but for virtual machines. And then what's their hourly rate? And again, what that will do is take into consideration how much you're paying for an on-premise IT admin. Maybe they could reduce that capacity when they move to cloud, and therefore it can push your business forward. You then move into all sorts of other assumptions, and again, these are things that maybe wouldn't necessarily be considered. So we've got physical hardware costs, so we're actually now doing this by the processor, we can see. We also, if we look at things like electricity costs, and again, I don't know many people that would be super granular, but you can be if you choose to be as granular about what the electrical costs are per processor, so that can actually be built in. And as you go through these assumptions, what you'll be doing is just adding more information so they can be more and more accurate. So again, SQL Server enterprise licenses per 2 cores, what have you got, and then actually putting in the price of that so that you can see what that would be. If we go to next, this is where we get to the report, and as you can see, and again, this is very, very vague because this is just a practice run, so you can see what's going on. Over a 5-year period, your Azure, your estimated cost savings could be as much as 130,000. I mean, that would be great if we could do that. It gives you a lovely graph, so you can actually then track that in terms of trajectory of what your on-premise costs would be, what your Azure costs would be, and then you can start to dig into the details. So a really, really helpful platform in that respect. So now let's look at the Azure costing calculator. Great, so we are now with the Azure pricing calculator, and again, you'll notice that I've actually signed myself in, so this is now going to be giving me the ability to actually save different scenarios. And again, you may use this time and time again as you build out your estate on Azure. One quick thing to again notice is if we scroll right the way to the very bottom, we can actually see an export tab. So anything that I've now got on the screen above, I can do. We've got an ability to save or save as if I really want to, or I can share it. But the biggest thing I want to also draw your attention to is the fact that, again, we need to consider our currency. So I want to be switching it over to United Kingdom for GBP. The other side of it as well is that this is essentially going to be showing you Microsoft RRP rather than the price that you would get by working with us as a CSP provider. For that reason, again, when you're looking at things like the actual programs, you can obviously put it in as a CSP, but I would just stick to the MCA just to make it easier. If you have got any workloads that are dev test, those are still better placed with Microsoft because you can enable something called dev test pricing. So if any of those workloads are, then again, switching over this will now adjust your calculator, and you can see it's telling us that actually the dev test pricing has been applied. So for things like virtual machines, this is really, really pivotal because it's going to reduce that cost for you, and it's worth noting just to make sure that you've got the right criteria. I'm going to take it off on this occasion. We're going to delete some of these so we can start fresh, but you can see how easy it is just to set up and do it. We've got our initial estimate at the top here, and let's just say for argument's sake you wanted to see a virtual machine. Again, a lot of the legwork is taken care of for you when you're actually trying to work out what the costs are going to be, so you can take it straight there. So the first thing, where are we actually setting this resource? In this case, it's probably going to be in the UK South region because we're in the United Kingdom. Operating system, again, we need to be mindful. Windows licenses would be needed if we're going to run Windows. Obviously, Linux is not necessarily the case, so that can reduce your costs. And then again, what's actually this virtual machine doing? Is it just running the operating system because we're going to layer over our application? Are we running SQL on this? And if we are, that would be a consideration. For dev test workloads, you're probably going to use basic. Any kind of production workloads is going to be standard. Again, the categories, you can go for various different considerations depending on your needs. So maybe we want compute optimized because we're going to be running some quite complex calculations, or our actual workloads are quite compute intensive. Maybe we just want a general purpose machine which is going to run some various different things for our applications. The next piece of the puzzle again is looking at the various series. Now, one thing to point out is that, let's say for argument's sake we chose general purpose. What this does is it filters our series types that we can use. So for example, general purpose typically will be a D series. Yes, there are some burstable capacity in there that you can think of. Things like A series virtual machines are going to be going end of life in the next sort of year or so. And these are typically going to be for test and dev anyway, so it's not necessarily something that you're going to be using, but you can see it's filtered our respective view. The one thing I would sort of encourage you to do is, if you are kind of looking at the various different offerings, is just start to look at what some of the lettering mean. So typically the big letter in the front is the actual series that you're using, and then if you see the following letters, it will normally correspond to things like can premium storage be attached, or is it using AMD Athlon CPUs in the actual virtual machines, and so on. Things like big DC here, this is actually suggesting that it's, the compute capacity is confidential. So if you've got highly regulated environments, that might be a consideration for you. Again, you would then go and select the specific series that you would want in terms of the capability, so we can select whichever option we want. Let's go for a nice D series. I think it's always a nice one to do. Let's go for a D8. There we go. So we can see now how many virtual CPUs we've got running, what the actual RAM is going to be applying, and then again, has it got temporary storage? Again, this is a key thing that you might want to be aware of. Not every virtual machine will have temporary storage attached. Obviously, if the virtual machine gets closed down, that is wiped, so it's something to be considerate of. It does affect pricing as well, so you'll find things without temporary storage sometimes are a bit cheaper. How many VMs are you actually going to be running with that particular series type? So in this case, it's just one of these. Maybe we've got two ADS's V5s that we're running. And then what you've noticed as well is that this is doing it by the month. So this is typically 730 hours. If I want to do it by days, I could do it by days. If I want to do it by month, I could do it by a calendar month. It's entirely up to you. Typically people leave it on the hours because maybe you've got your virtual machines running 24/7, but maybe you might have a specific set of virtual machines that are only working during the week, in which case you can actually plumb in the specific hours. Then you come to the interesting bits. You can see here we're setting up, is this compute now going to be paid for on just an ongoing basis, pay as you go? Have we purchased savings plans or reservations? Now, this is a really good metric so you can actually help save on cost. Essentially what you're doing is you're committing to a specific term and saying to Microsoft, we are going to be using the compute on this virtual machine for either a year or 3 years, and as such they're going to leverage a discount for you. On the right hand side, this will look fairly familiar because we saw this in our total cost of ownership calculator where we actually looked at Azure hybrid benefits. So if we had the appropriate licenses, this is where we would go to tick it. Now you can see at the moment I haven't actually clicked that, and because of such we've got a license being paid for just pay as you go. As soon as I click on the Azure hybrid, that now wipes it. And again, we can actually then see what our total costs are. There'll be various considerations as you work through this. So is there specific disks that you're attaching? These are your OS disks. If you want to then consider the data disks, you can then add them separately. Again, the one thing I would make sure you do is just make sure, unlike me, you go back to the right currency because I haven't done it. And so now we can see that's now switched over to Great British Pounds, and it's that straightforward. The one thing to be aware of is that rubbish in with this particular calculator will provide rubbish out. So the one thing to be mindful of is how your infrastructure is going to connect in. Yes, we can give you an initial cost of a virtual machine here, but there's all sorts of different things that could easily be missed if you're not aware of them. So for example, if you haven't added a data disk, this wouldn't technically be your total costs. If we don't consider things like IP addresses, this wouldn't be your total cost. If we don't consider maybe network monitoring that you're going to be doing, this wouldn't be your total costs. So the one thing that we always suggest is don't do your resources in isolation. Have an understanding of what exactly you're going to be deploying. Have it all in one big bunch. So maybe, if we wanted to suggest IP addresses, there we go. And we can go down and we can just add an IP address now just for fun. We're going to put this again in the same region. We're going to make it standard. We're going to say it's going to be a static one and it's going to be running 24/7. There we go. Once I'm happy and I've got my total costs, I can now export that, and what will happen is this will now generate a CSV file so we can open it in Excel. And then what I can do is I can provide this then to my architectural teams, my SLT, maybe if you're working with us as your partner, provide it to us of what you expect the actual infrastructure to look like. So I'm going to bring this up on screen in just a tick. And the good news is that you've then got that as version control. So we can see here, this is our export that we've got. We can see exactly what service category that fits into, what we're actually looking at, so VMs, IP addresses in this case, what we added, so we've got the specific costings. Interestingly, you can see that the considerations have been put in. So things like the upfront costs, if we are maybe paying upfront for a reserved instance, for example, we would have that upfront cost there. We can then see when this was done. So again, you can keep this with version control. We can see this was done on the 26th of March at a particular time, if that's of interest to anybody, just so that you know that this is obviously subject to change. If we then run this in a month's time, due to exchange rate changes, there may be a fluctuation slightly in some of the costings. And that's as easy as it is. But those two things combined will hopefully help you as you start to build out your migration plan. The total cost of ownership calculator very much is looking at what you're currently doing, what the associated costs are doing. So thinking of compute, thinking of databases, thinking of networking, thinking of storage, thinking of how that is run in terms of our teams, how we're looking at paying that in terms of electricity. And then more importantly, we combine that with the Azure pricing calculator to accurately cost as best as possible what our infrastructure costs are looking like when we migrate to cloud. Nice and straightforward.